over here. Give me one moment. All right, we're ready when you are.
I would like to call to order this special meeting of the Encinitas City Council for Wednesday, December 13th, 2023 at 4 p.m. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Absolutely. Councilmember Blackwell?
Here.
Councilmember Ehlers?
Here.
Councilmember Hinsey?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Lyons?
Here.
Mayor Krantz?
Here.
Record will show that all members of the city council are present this evening.
Thank you. And we have a single item on the agenda, and it is the glamorous business of considering sewer rate costs of service study for the Cardiff Sanitary District and the Encinitas Sanitary District. And Director Issam is going to lead us.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz and council members. In today's workshop, we will be discussing the sewer rate study for both Encinitas and Cardiff sanitary divisions, together with a capacity fee for new connections. The purpose of the sewer rate study is to provide a fair, equitable, and reliable revenue stream for Encinitas Sanitary Division and Cardiff Sanitary Division to ensure the ongoing operation costs and proposed capital costs are met, and that every individual and customer are paying their fair share of maintaining the system. The city had hired Ardura to update the sewer cost of service study. Ardura's Southwestern Operation Manager, Ms. Carmen Gasner, is with us today, and she will be providing a presentation about the sewer study and the capacity fees. Based upon council input and direction, staff, with the help of Ardura, will finalize the rate study and return to stay with the proposed rate changes for City Council's consideration and request authorization for Proposition 218 public hearing. With that, Carmen, it's yours.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, I'm Carmen Kasner, Mayor, council members, few members of city staff mainly. It's a pleasure to be here. We do want this to be very much a workshop, discussion, so please don't be afraid to interrupt me. If you have any questions, if something I'm explaining or talking about isn't clear, you can wait until the end and save them all then, but I think it'll be more workshop appropriate if you want to interrupt as we go along. So as Issam said, we were hired to do a wastewater rate study for you. As a reminder, you've got 3 different wastewater service areas. Only 2 of them are under your control as a city council. We've got the Cardiff Sanitary Division and the Encinitas Sanitary Division. The Katy Wastewater District does service a fair chunk of the city of Encinitas, but we're only talking about CSD and ESD, and we will be using those 2 acronyms pretty consistently throughout. It's just easier. So what goes into wastewater rates? As with many water rates, and I know you recently did your water rate study, the major components for wastewater is the operation and maintenance costs. That includes electricity, maintaining the pump stations, the public works staff to clean the pipes and video them and maintain their condition of them. It includes electricity and maintenance at the pump stations. You do have several pump stations in the city that need to be taken care of. The Cardiff pump station near the Manchester interchange is the largest one for CSD, and the largest one for ESD is the Moonlight Beach pump station. Then you have treatment costs, and in this case, we have 2 different treatment systems that we're flowing to. The Cardiff system flows to the San Alejo treatment facility, and the Encinitas division, ESD, flows to Encina. Cardiff, you are a more than 30% owner of that treatment plant. At Encina, you're only about 4% of their treatment area, so very small percentages of their dollars. The next part of the wastewater rate component is your capital improvement program that addresses your collection system and treatment. So if San Alejo or Encina needs to do a major capital improvement program, your wastewater ratepayers need to pay a portion of that. It also includes debt service within that capital, so there was historical projects done by San Alejo that you are still paying the debt service on for a number of years. And then it's important to have reserves, because your flow, your rates are not consistent, things happen in the system, you sometimes have emergencies that occur. It's important to have a proper amount of reserves as well. Then your revenue components. You basically get your revenue through billings. You bill a vast majority of your wastewater on your county tax roll. They're calculated annually in the summer, and then put on the tax bill that then you receive the revenues. Most of it comes in January to May of the following year. So you have to make sure you have your reserves to cover the time. You have each of your billings, you have a combination of fixed charges and flow charges. That is the way your current rates are structured. We are not recommending any changes to that rate structure. When we go into it, I do have some information on what other cities do. I think it works well for you. Wastewater revenue component also includes capacity fees, that if you are doing new construction, you can charge capacity fees in your system, because that you need to account for it at the treatment plants. And even ADUs can have capacity fees charged to them if you have them in your city. And I know most of you do. And then interest earnings. Obviously, there's, when you have realized interest earnings, that is a revenue to you. So a little bit of history for where you are. The two systems stand. The last rate study was done in 2015. At that time, the CSD division had rates that alternated increases between 3% and 4% and went through 2019. And there was no recommended increase for ESD at that time. So technically, the last rate increase for ESD ended in 2013. So it's been more than it's now 10 years since ESD has had a rate increase. And there's some reasonings why we can go into if you're interested. And it's mainly to do with the fact that there's a lot of development occurring in the Encinitas division in the 2000s that built up a lot of reserves that we have been working off of. Your billings are interesting, is that you do use for single family and multifamily, you have a base rate, but then you also, for your flow rate, you don't use just the prior year water use. You do a 5-year rolling winter water. This was done, I think, in 2004 possibly, set up that way because we were concerned about the variability of water usage. And as it's played out, especially starting in 2017, it's a pretty very big challenge and opportunity for you. But it's really helped normalize your rates over the last period of time. There is one other part. We do have that average is billed, but we do reduce it still from there because we use winter water. So we look at the 2 lowest months of water use, take that 5-year average of that lowest months, and then we reduce it still a little bit more because we know many customers are still doing some watering in the winter months. The whole goal is to try and determine how much actual wastewater you're treating, and that you're charging them only for the portion of the water that they are using that you are treating. And this calculation actually works out pretty good for you when I compare water treated versus water delivered, other than the 5-year average variability of it. But it accounts for that you don't want to charge people for the water being used to irrigate your plantings outside, what goes into the wastewater system. A couple other notes, as I think you guys well know, your CSD system is definitely an older system and definitely has some additional challenges of the system from that perspective. And then ESD definitely has more reserves due to the capacity charges when a lot of the development was going on. Encinitas Ranch, for example. This slide was presented in your last, in your water study, and I think it's important to reiterate it here for the wastewater, is to see the growth CPI for water and wastewater costs versus CPI for general as well as food. And we've seen a pretty big jump in CPI in the last couple years now with inflation during the pandemic. But water and wastewater has just been consistently going up, up, up. And a lot of that has to do with the cost of chemicals, the cost of building infrastructure is just more expensive than other things. Then the next two slides, I'm just showing you for general purposes the amount of revenues that you're receiving annually for both Cardiff and Encinitas the last 5 years. I think it shows in Cardiff, pretty consistent. No, not very many new customers. The flows are very consistent. There was a little bit of a drop in 2022. I think that was some of it was due to the way the 5-year hit, because in 2017 was a major conservation year on water. And so then that would have been part of the 5-year average. I'm not quite sure exactly, but those are the numbers. And it was, only about $400,000, but it's important to note that that's a pretty big drop in revenue. And anytime you have a drop in revenue, that, affects your reserves and needed cost system.
A question on that last slide. What was the difference between the purple and the yellow? Purple is the reserves?
No, it's what's on the tax roll versus what's billed manually. So there are so if the school districts, for example, they don't get a tax bill, so we have to the city manually bills them that way.
I see. Thank you.
So that's all it is. It's just a small amount. I mean, it has to do with the, the school districts, the SDG&E. Yeah.
Would hookup fees be in the, not in the purple, but in the other revenue, basically?
This is actually only your rates fees, not the capacity charges. I don't have those numbers in this bar chart. ESD, there's a pretty much bigger, you got to look at the numbers. It goes from 2.6 million to almost 2.78 or 7.6, then drop down to 2.5, but that's almost a $200,000 drop in fees, then back up a fair bit in 23. So we think it's stabilizing, especially given the water usage, but I'm not no crystal ball exactly there either. So some of the other key assumptions we wanted to just discuss and make sure you are aware of. So we aren't we're not estimating that we're going to increase or decrease your wastewater flows. We're not projecting that next year's rates, you're only going to bill, another 10% less. We're just saying it's pretty flat for the 5-year average. Again, I don't have a crystal ball to know what your water use is exactly, but it does affect it. Conservation does affect your wastewater. And the price of the bills can affect wastewater and water as well. We are considering only a very nominal increase of customers of 1%. That's been what it's been over the last few years. I am showing some pretty high inflation numbers, I think, based upon what I've talked with the San Alejo staff and Encina staff, Acadia staff. CIP, cost of construction, everything in my industry we see, because I work with a lot of I'm an engineer, and I work with a lot of engineers. Construction costs are not coming down. There's just not enough labor. There's not enough materials. I don't see, they're coming down a little bit, inflation rates, but they're going to continue to increase. It's just what we're seeing. Labor shortages is definitely not helping. Utilities, that's we're at the mercy of SDG&E. And then the general is much more based on your salary negotiations with your city staff, the salary increases that have already been negotiated. We are definitely seeing significant increased treatment costs from San Alejo and Encina. Again, their cost of chemicals, their cost of, is just all going up. And the other key challenge you've got facing you is that most of your system is starting to reach the end of its first life. Much was built out in the 60s, late 50s. That's those pipes and pump stations, many of the pump stations we've addressed already, but the pipes, they're aging, and we are going to be needing to spend more money on taking care of them in the coming years. You do have a condition assessment program in place, and a replacement program will be implemented. The 2020 master plan that was adopted 2 springs ago, I believe, identified some critical facilities that needed to be replaced. So then our goals for establishing rates, we want the revenue to match the cost of service. It doesn't currently. We want to maintain reserves. We are generally doing that very well. And we want to address the aging infrastructure, but be realistic in our expenditures. Every city is a little bit different in how fast they can spend, but most cities, when it comes to capital, don't spend every dollar every year. So we want to be very realistic. So we put some options together for you. A couple key other things I wanted to share. You probably realize this already, that the CSD system is more than 66% single family, 21% multifamily, and then only 13% of the system is commercial of some type. That agricultural, last year you didn't actually bill any agricultural. So your existing rates for CSD, we're mainly focused on the single family in our discussions. They have, you have a fixed annual charge that's down here towards the bottom. Does my mouse work? Yeah, so here it's 40, there's a base charge that's based on your meter size. And so for the single family, that's $47 a year. You bill annually though, so that's why it's only one a year. But then you charge based on the flow for the complete year. 2021, that was the last numbers we were using. The median sewage discharge was 87.200 cubic feet per year. That equates to about 7.266 per month. San Diego County, most agencies are around 700 cubic feet per month, so that your very standard flow rates here are consistent with other entities that do sewer billings. And that's where why the return ratio works very good for you. And I think it's a very fair and equitable calculation, because that's a really important part of rates, is making sure what we're doing is equitable. ESD, a little bit more multifamily, a little bit more commercial, because that's the other aspect of Encinitas. Their historical median, their rates are lower, so 551 for this flow rate versus 519. Their average flows are also a little bit less. They are 7.05 per month, which is spot on with the regional average. Their annual charge on the water meters are much less. This is only $34 versus the CSD of the 47, I believe. Or 47, yeah. So that's where you are with existing rates. I want to mention, go into just a little bit of detail about your, is that all clear as mud thus far? Okay. Talk a little bit about reserve policy. No, that's not a typo. The last time this reserve policy was updated was in 2003, but it's a solid reserve policy. Most agencies, the operating cash flow reserve of 50% of next year's expenditures, that allows you to carry because you only get most of your money at 2 times of the year versus spread out like a water customer that gets either monthly or bi-monthly bills. It just is a nice, appropriate cash flow reserve. Then there's a rate stabilization fund that we want to make sure that we can always cover your debt service as a minimum. And that's where, as well as the variabilities of those years. When you have less money coming in, you theoretically could dip into those reserves if you needed to. And then the larger chunk is your capital replacement reserve. The way it's written up, the description talks about a fund for a worst-case scenario where you need a major emergency repair, cleanup, and replacement at one of your pump stations. But you also want to be about sufficient to fund a CIP for 1 year. $250 million, $2.5 million is the numbers minimum. You'll see when we're putting our rates together that we aren't probably going to be much more than that minimum most of the time. But that will do a good project for you if you needed to in an emergency, which is, again, what really reserve policy is for. Okay, so now let's talk about capital improvement. What is being proposed for the city? There is a lot of different projects out there. The proposed is what's in this year's budget. It includes costs for the Levenheim trunk sewer, finishing of some of that project from this year. There's some work that is being done at the Cardiff pump station and the force main. And then you're starting to put money towards other collection system rehabilitation and money to start doing some condition assessment, some on-call services, and the lion's share of those dollars, at least in this, the first 2 years, is for San Alejo capital projects. But we want to start building and taking care of your system because it's aging. We need to have money in order to do capital projects. I will note here the debt service I've kept that out through 2028. I didn't mean to, that note is wrong. It goes through 2045, I believe. And there's some leasing charges. There's a line I put here in working with Esam and the team. We considered whether we would actually spend the full amount of the CIP in a year. And we wanted to have some analysis on what we would do if we don't quite spend all $2.275 million, and we only spent about 75% of it in any 1 year. It's just therefore, we're going to use it as we go through some of our alternatives that we're going to present to you. I think it catches up to you eventually because you eventually do complete the projects, and so you need the money at the end of the day, but we wanted it there for evaluation and consideration purposes. So we put together a CSD, their financial plan for you of what the revenues would be with various increases. There's the way this spreadsheet is set, it's actually a spreadsheet. The way it's set up is we start with what cash balance is available in your reserve. There's a year-end cash balance area. That's how much you currently have sitting in reserves for Cardiff, $6.895 million. Below it is the targeted reserve target. And I really simplified the lines above to show the revenue, how much revenue we would receive versus what you're projecting your expenditures. So the expenditures, the O&M, are straight increases with those inflation rates I provided earlier. So the O&M is basically your salary increase inflation over the next few years, unless if we knew there was something specific. The San Alejo debt service and leasing, capital expenditures, in order to keep your cash balance close to or above your cash reserve target, these are the types of increases we need. The 15% for year 1, 15% for year 2, 15 for 3, 15 for 4, and then we can start dropping it in year 5. This does allow you to draw down. You are drawing down your cash balance just a little bit. You drop below for a couple years the cash reserve target, but it's not significantly below it. We were just trying to be a little bit reasonable in increases. The revenues start going up a lot, but your costs are going up a lot as you start doing more capital, and you start having to replace things over time.
Could I ask a quick question? So on the line for capital expenditures, you're assuming they're the 100% budget, not 75%?
Yes, so the next, so I will have another slide that has 75% evaluation for you. So this in a bar graph shows it, I think, very, very easily for you. It shows in green how much revenue you're bringing in red, how much you're spending. The dots are your cash reserves, and then the other line is just where you would like to, where you'll be at with the reserve balance.
Do you have the same kind of graph, but going backward in history? Because what this suggests is that our revenues have been much less than expenses, possibly for multiple years? Or did that invert recently, and if so, what was the cause?
It has I did not have a slide with that. I'm fairly familiar with your with your history. It has inverted because of increased costs of operations, increased costs of capital, increased treatment costs, and you had a dip in some of your revenues also. Your revenues have stayed essentially flat when all the other things have gone up.
And when you say increased cost of capital, you don't mean debt service, because
No.
that's fixed. You're talking about acquisition of
Capital
any...
projects.
Okay.
Capital projects,
So supply costs.
pipelines in the ground, the cost of doing construction.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it did not used to be like this.
I just want to add one thing in that regard, is that the cost of capital cost is actually also impacted by San Alejo and Encinitas.
Right.
They control that. We, as a city, do not control the amount of expenditure and whatever capital improvements they are going to be doing during the 5 years. Yes, I sit on both meetings, but still, they are in control of what their facilities would need, which is a little bit different than what we had on the water side. On the water side, we have much more input with the Badger plant, so that's why we suggested the 75%. So as part of our discussions here, I wanted to show you the 75% that we use on the water side, but please keep in mind that we cannot control that. If for a reason or another, Encinitas and San Alejo actually do fulfill 100% of their execution rate, then we would be in trouble if we go with the 75%.
And have the capital costs on both Encina and San Alejo, JPA, gone up commensurately, about the same amount?
20 to 30% up, yep.
20 to 30% both simultaneously, independently?
Well, Encina didn't go up quite as much last year. They'd been or the last 2 years, because they were short some staff.
Yeah.
So they weren't executing as many of the projects as they intended
Right.
to. But they had other pension costs going on too, so you ended up, it kind of normalized for you a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, no, you are no different than many cities. I mean, there's the member agencies that flow into the city of San Diego, they deal with the same thing. That the member agencies have little to no control over the city of San Diego. I mean, yes, they have their Metro JPA, but the treatment costs are what the treatment costs are, and regulatorily, they are increasing.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that, Isam, when you were talking about, we don't have control. Could you characterize for me, when we're talking about CIP here on this slide, it's facilities costs, but it's also pipes in the ground? Yeah. So it's the facility itself, and in this case, San Alejo is located within the jurisdictional boundaries of the area that it serves. In case of Encina, it's located differently, but this includes the pipes and the facility, so it's somewhat different. Can you clarify?
It makes clear there are three portions to the CIP. One of them is the Encina San Alejo. Oh, I'm sorry. There are three portions of the CIP that impacts us, which is San Alejo, Encinitas, and then our infrastructure that we are responsible to maintain.
Right.
So all of these three are impacted. So what the information that you have in front of you right now is basically based on the CIP rate that was provided to us by Encina and by San Alejo. And that's why we took that into consideration. The pipe rehabilitation is something that the council has already approved the condition assessment back in October for us to go through that and start replacing some of the deteriorated pipelines in the near future. And that's why we're trying to save or add some additional money so that we will slowly but surely get to the point where we have enough money to be able to replace some of our pipelines that have reached their useful life.
Yes, so your pipelines are included in the, as well as if anything within San Alejo, within their treatment plant, that's within their jurisdiction. But our pipes that flow into it, our pump stations that pump sewage to it, that's under your control as the city.
Thank you for clarifying. So the sewer rates are all three of those buckets?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, we have to cover all of them. So this is the CSD, 100%, as I shared before you. This is what the, if we assumed a 75% CIP execution rate, we could go to a lower rate increase, 12.5 to 10, 10, 10. It does keep you a little bit better on your year-end cash balance, but then you may get hit with more of those costs from San Alejo, so that are outside, and they've got a lot of projects that they're in plans. So this is a similar spreadsheet. It shows that we keep at the reserve balance minimum, and it's just an option for consideration. But San Alejo, when you are more than 30% of their CIP, if they execute at a better rate, it impacts your rates your rate payers much more than Encina, where you're only 4% of their capital projects. So,
I have a question on this slide. So you selected to analyze the 75% option because that's typically the capital program that we get through?
The reason we showed up at 75% is because most of agencies in their CIP rates that they propose, usually the execution rate is not 100%. Just because of staffing, because of issues that come up, because of hurdles that you have to jump as you go, environmental, whatever have you, that causes that. And that's why on the water side, if you recall, we did actually use 75%, and we were at a much better comfort level than we are on the wastewater side, just because we are dependent on the other agencies like San Alejo and Encinitas. For example, in Encinitas, we have 4%, so the number of board members that sits on there could overrule what our issues might be, right? I mean, because there is I can't know what to call you, president or deputy mayor, Joe Lyons. I don't really remember how many board members there are on the Encinitas, but
10.
10. So, and we have only 2, so we could be overridden with the amount of trying to get their CIP to be lowered, so that will not impact our customers.
Right, so when we serve as the water district, we could do 75%, and that's totally within our control
That
to
is
only
correct.
execute 75. But in this case, you're recommending perhaps it's 100 so that we can keep up to date with the projects of our other agencies. Got
Exactly
it,
right.
thank you.
Yeah. And because it's a workshop, we thought we should have at least some ideas or options for you to consider. And
As a follow-up question to that, being that the costs of all these CIPs are increasing, what's your prediction? Do you think that some of these projects we've laid out, Tony and I serve on San Alejo JPA, do you think it's likely that they will move forward? Or do you think because of the constraints with cost and labor shortages and all these other factors that we should expect less than 100%?
I can use an example of this morning that at Encinitas, the project engineer's estimate was at $7.1 million, and it came up to be at $8.8 million. So that was an increase from what originally was planned. So you could, and there was only one bidder, so there wasn't really a competition in regards to that. So all of these will impact us one way or another. So the construction industry, it's the same thing with any other CIP program that we're having within the city. Here in Encinitas, it's the same thing. I mean, the engineers estimate at a certain level, and all of a sudden everything comes like at least 10 to 15% more. We just had one on the water side of the house. We anticipated it to be $700,000, and it came at $950,000. So, and when it is within our control, we can actually delay or do something in regards to address the budget. But when it is in Encinas or in San Alejo, it will be hard to do something like that because they want to move forward and make sure that they actually address the regulatory aspects of it and meet the regulations.
Yeah, they're much more under scrutiny from a regulatory, I mean, if you had spills, then you would have a regulatory scrutiny, but the treatment plants don't have a lot of wiggle room, and they have to do some of these projects, and so I don't see them delaying. I mean, I know in San Alejo is fully staffed up, and they're getting stuff out the door as quickly as they can because they need to from a regulatory standpoint. And again, keep in mind that CSD worth more than 30% of their CIP costs, whereas Encina were only 4% of their CIP costs. So the CSD, you know, has much more of an impact on you, the San Alejo treatment costs, as you'll see when we go into the Encinas. So if we maybe want to go on to that, that might help you, because it may help you understand. So for the ESD capital improvement program, you do have some big, there is a cost for some capital costs projected at the Moonlight Beach Pump Station. You do have a very large project happening at Cottonwood Creek. That sewer line needs some rehabilitation. I'm not sure what you're doing. Yeah, it's
Actually, we're realigning the pipeline.
relining it, okay. So that's a pretty big project, though. Your share of the capital costs, it's still a lot, even though it's 4%, because it is a much larger system. But you have a little bit more, you know, I guess percentage-wise, it's actually pretty similar now that I look at it again. Because you have costs for doing rehabilitation projects. We're showing the rehabilitation at a lower dollars because it is a newer system than CSD. But you've got the Bataquitas Lagoon Pump Station that's got some big projected costs from Lucadia. Their project, their Encinas Capital, I mean, they're still, I think, staffing up, if I remember right. I haven't heard if they've gotten everyone hired, so getting their projects executed for the next couple of years might still be challenged. But you have two big, with the big project, Cottonwood Creek project, that's a very needed project. I identified that a long time ago. And then you've got your on-call engineering and condition assessment project. So, yes, percentage-wise, your ESD, Encina is still a very large percentage, and you have less control on it. I guess, so, yeah. We did put forth, though, and there's no debt service, and there is a 75% expenditure rate. So these are the numbers you don't want to see, but very similar. Now, you have a lot more cash balance right now in Encinas and Encinitas, ESD, than you did over in the CSD, but your rates, because there hasn't been a rate increase in so long, the amount of revenue being brought in is a lot lower, and so getting them back up to a consistent and more equitable rate with CSD, it's a heavier lift of 19%. This does have us dropping below your year-end cash balance by a little bit, almost $1 million below the cash balance. Just wanted to put forth numbers that we thought could be even remotely acceptable. As you can see, there's some big expenditures more than the source of the funds. Drawing down that is a good thing. Is not a bad thing to do. We can't do it quick enough, though. without making the rate increases even more. But you haven't had a rate increase here in 10 years. 75% plan, it's a little bit, I think it's quite a bit better, 17, 16, 15, 14. And definitely keeps you having a year-end cash balance that is still positive. And so it looks much better if Encinitas doesn't execute as fast as we think they might, so.
Could I ask a question around that? Because it kind of goes back to 75% versus 100%, but also associated with the fact that things, the engineer's estimate, just consider engineer's estimate, okay, that's, and say it's a 12-month schedule, I don't know, that's probably, I'm just making it up, but now now the numbers, the bids are coming in and it's being accepted and approved, you're maybe 124% above your engineer's estimate, and your time frame often, because of supply chain issues, is extended beyond what you originally thought. And usually time is money, and that seems like it's making that make sense. Mm-hmm. How does all that work then when we talk about 75% and 100%? How do we make sense of it if we try to translate it through 100% versus 75%?
Well, you're spot on the fact that they are taking longer. Their costs are going up. So they may still be actually executing close to that 100% range.
Yeah, I was wondering.
That, I don't have an, exact answer on, this is with a,
I will just take a shot at it. When you prepare your CIP rates for the next 5 years, as you go along and we start getting higher bids than you expected them to be, then the best way to approach it is you start delaying some of the projects that you can live without during that 5 period, because obviously the monies that you have or the funds have already been determined based on the rate study that you have conducted. So that's why you find out some of the agencies start delaying some of the projects, very similar to what we did last year on the water side of the house. If you recall, because of the Lake Hodges issue, we ended up delaying some of the Badger Plant CIP program for future years, just because of the high cost of purchasing of water because we lost the local water. So you manage that as you go. Obviously, there is anything that's set in concrete. Maybe in 2 years when we start bidding, we'll get a lot of bidders and all of a sudden there's a lot of competition and the prices will go down. But when you can take one shot of the process as you go along and try to do the best guess estimate of where you're going to be in the next 5 years.
I will throw one other idea out there. Okay. I know we debated about whether we would talk about it. There is state statute that allows you to do a pass-through of treatment costs and utility costs. Members of the city of San Diego, they're Metro JPA members, they use that. Some of them use it very extensively because they don't have a crystal ball for what the city of San Diego's bill are going to be. And what you do is basically then each year, if the projected bill from that agency comes in higher, you adjust your rates up or down accordingly. It's one way we could mitigate potentially. I'm just throwing it out there as a discussion for you.
It's a challenge, and then you have to administer how you're going to be billing different CSD or ESD, and how you're going to keep on changing it based on the need. So,
but if we were to go with the 75%, and we find out that they're executing 100 or 125%, it is something that could be considered to be done at that point in time. I'm just, it's not. Some cities like it, and some cities are like, yeah, I ain't doing that. So,
can you go back and show us what the assumed inflation and capital cost increases over this 6-year period?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. So you did have it drop off.
Yeah, I did have it drop off. But
Still have utilities significant. Okay.
And I'm not seeing SDG&E's bills going down anytime soon. Maybe you guys have a different
And
crystal ball.
these are independently applied. In other words, it's not
Correct.
additive or anything. It's if it's a capital project, you increase it this way. If it's a utility direct cost, okay, and then just the general CPI or CIP.
CIP, that's the
general
CIP.
CPI, I assume
Yeah.
is the button. Okay.
The general is your principally your salaries of city staff. and
Because
that's already been
we've gone
negotiated.
through, decades of very, very low inflation period, and we've hit and here's, we had this very discussion this morning at Encina. It really comes down to who's got the right crystal ball and who can predict what the inflation's gonna be in 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years as you're doing here. And so you're just putting a model up there and, you take a couple points off of each one of those and this model gets a lot prettier.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you have water conservation continuing, then it doesn't really continue,
Yeah.
doesn't help you. I mean, it's not just one factor, it's all the factors put together, so.
But that would have to be huge amounts of water savings from where we are today.
Yes,
And
yes.
we've already gone through that part of the curve, so is it likely we're gonna cut in half again?
No, definitely not. And you're not there
that's my
anyway, because you're using winter water
Yeah.
use, not,
Exactly.
But we still have new regulations not coming up in regards to reducing the amount of gallons per day per capita from 55, which is currently in 2 years, to going down to 42. So, I mean, that also will play a role, and that will reduce the amount of revenues that we get on the wastewater side of the house.
But presumably, if that happens, because this is a capital situation, we are going to have to inversely proportionally raise our rates so that we're essentially servicing the same amount of capital investment. So,
That is correct, yeah.
to me, that's an outside influence that, when it happens, we should address. But today, I don't want to predict what the regulatory environment will do from a water usage.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
The one other thing that hasn't been addressed, and it was not increased in 2000, your last rate study, was your capacity fees. That's the buy-in cost, and there's a number of different ways we can calculate it. I've thrown out basically 3 different ways. You can calculate it based on existing assets, your future assets, or CPI. All of those are defensible. I recommend you at least consider one of them, that you do an increase to your capacity fees, because they need to be buying into the cost of your system that's already built. That's basically to buy into the treatment plant and the pipes that you've already built and put into place. They should pay their fair share. So, what number you pick, it's really much methodology. It's your choice. I have no strong feelings either way. They're all defensible. Future assets does include your future CIP projects that we're showing in this 5 years. Again, it's all very defensible. Either way, currently your capacity fees are $3,400 and $2,600, so they both are not.
And if needed, we can provide more details of how
Yeah, I
these numbers came about, just to give you a better understanding of exactly how we came up with these numbers.
Yeah, basically, we calculate the cost of the assets and then apportion it out to the number of users and such. So it's very formulatic from that perspective. So, I think it's always helpful to show where you are relative to others. Yes, Leucadia did just do a rate increase. There's still only 40, this is with our new rate increase for this next year. Carlsbad had 3 years of some increases, so they're now definitely up here. Del Mar is been high for a very long time, and it's not coming down any. They each do them differently. Many of these rates are completely flat rates, I will say that. Encinitas is flat, Leucadia is flat, County San Diego's flat, Buena and Solana Beach, Vista are all flat, so Flow is only you guys, City of San Diego, Carlsbad, Carlsbad is flat, but multifamily is flow. Del Mar is flow, Oceanside is flow, based. So, I did it on, here's an easier way to see, I should have probably highlighted this row with the average bill of 7 HCF, of what that monthly bill would be for your customers and what the increases are if we use the 15% increases. 42 to 48, then 56, 64. That's the flow portion of it. That does not include your fixed annual that does increase by that same 15%. But when you divide that by 12, it's a pretty small portion of it. At 75%, the rates are definitely less with your average monthly bill. ESD, the rates get pretty high by the time you get to year 5, not gonna lie. But it is, it's where your costs are. And even at 75, then it's 5% CPI. That brings it out quite a bit, into the 76 range versus 68. So I showed in this one chart, this first year rate increase at for ESD at 100% versus 75%, and then CSD at 100% versus the 75%, just so you can see all the numbers in one graphic location for you. This does include no, that is just the flow portion. I realized that does not include this divided by the 12. So anyway, where do we go from here? Once you guys give us some directions, and we would, as Isam already mentioned, we would present the study end of January, beginning of February, depending on timing. We would then go through the Prop 218 notification process. There's a public hearing to review the protest votes and potentially adopt the rates. And the second includes incorporation into you always have to have the second reading because of the ordinance, and there is some cleanup we need to do in your ordinance to make it clear on a few things, so.
I had a question about the way the rates are established. There was a table that pointed out that the meter size, water meter size was, had a fixed fee, and there were single-family homes versus multifamily, and it seems odd that, are we leaving it then up to the property owner, the landlord of a multifamily unit to divvy up those costs in the monthly, so it's their responsibility, the property owner, not each individual. Whereas they may have their own, a renter may have their own gas bill, because I know that many of these have individual meters for the units. They may have their own water bills as well, but sewer is not independently billed.
It's a property right, and that's why you bill it on the property tax roll
bill.
also, and.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Sometimes I wonder why I'm sitting up here, and then I find presentations like this fascinating, and I'm like, oh, this is why. So I think this is the first time I've had the chance to actually delve into sewer rates since I've been serving on this council. And it is so fascinating, and it also really helps me understand the work that we do at San Elijo JPA. I of course want to hear what my colleagues have to say, but I think that you made a very strong case for fully funding the 100% CIP and going with the rates that are at the highest end of things. I am always shocked actually how low our rates are in Encinitas when I get the bill and think about, public safety is a very important aspect of what we do, but wastewater might be even more important. And I feel like we are very ambitious at San Elijo JPA, and it's because we treat water as such a precious resource. And I think that this is a good investment that we want to make at this time and make sure that we have the funds to keep up with it. So I would be in favor of returning back with the recommendation to fully fund the CIP.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Well, just my first reflection on the information. Thanks, that was well presented, by the way, for someone who's not, fully immersed in this. I got it. So my first reflection on it is that I think we're going to have a lot of pressure to reduce our speed of executing our capital program, just in general, just because of the cost of it. But, however, I'm very sensitive to the fact we have very old infrastructure. And this is one of those areas where, by looking at the dates of things, especially in my district, which includes the Cardiff area, that is old infrastructure that, we have to be aware of that. And when we get our condition assessment, we will be more aware of what that is. So we may want to predict that we should expend more for capital improvements in the next 10 years. I don't know that we can ramp up to that immediately. I think the reality is we may still be more at 75%, or in other words, maybe we may be in a condition where the cost of the infrastructure is much more expensive than we predict, so that we're really not able to go through our capital program as quickly as we had thought. But I think in the longer term, the more we position ourselves to be able to address the real and very risk-associated need of our old infrastructure, then the smarter we will be as leaders of the community. I get a little nervous, though, of making big jumps, but I like to look at the longer term and aim for something where we know we're going to be comfortable with the money we have. So those are my first reflections on the information.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, I want to go back to the chart that showed that I asked about the previous history. What's perplexing me and making me question whether we need to do the 100% is how we went from what I would call superfunded or excess cash reserves in 1 or 2 years down to nothing. And it was the sudden increase in capital costs. But it did say that prior to that, the revenues were more than sufficient and actually building up beyond what our reserves were required. Can we
I don't know
explain
that it was as much the revenues were more, other than you had a lot of capacity fees coming in, especially on the ESD side of the house. That's why it had such high reserves. I think you haven't been around, but I mean, I remember working with Bill a long time ago on this. You were getting a lot of capacity fees for a long time.
So that was actually a capacity reserve that, as the
You can use for
inflation
other
kept
things,
eating
yeah.
away at that, it actually, we're showing that it's almost half of what it should be going forward. So any recent development, so we're talking about essentially, let's see, is Encinitas Ranch in ESD or
ESD, yeah.
Acadia Water District?
I think most of it's an ESD.
So is that,
Yeah, yeah.
that explains it? Okay.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, and then infill in the rest of the city
No.
for the most part, a little bit, but mostly the late 80s, early 90s, 90s, I guess it was.
Late 90s, wasn't it?
Was it? For the
Mid to late
majority
90s,
of,
Encinitas Ranch. I was working at Powell when we did the treatment, did the big
yeah,
reservoir.
I guess it was, yeah, 90s. So,
It was
okay.
90s. It was in the 90s.
So that
mid-90s.
explained why we haven't seen this problem before. So it actually caused us to not raise the red flag that our reserves were. And then throw on top of that the rampant inflation and capital.
And you're not having increases in water usage. That's
Yeah.
actually going
Yeah.
down.
Okay.
I mean, because you've got increases in number of accounts, but your revenues are flat because you've got less water going in, that's being used. Now, you were probably getting some extra that should have been, it was irrigation water. But-
Hopefully it's not irrigation water, but
Well,
water
no, but
savings from.
Water savings resulted
household-
in less revenue for you.
Winter
because-
water savings
Yes.
of household, okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess I hate to make up everything in 1 year, and I know that chart you had up there shows that it is not making it up in 1 year, and it's actually taking, 4 or 5, so. I don't know if I'm there yet for the 100% funding. I like the 75, and a lot of it comes back to whose crystal ball. What could change here is if we do go into any sort of recession next year, the year after, and have a multi-year recession, a lot of the CIP could actually flatten, if not reverse slightly, too. So, but we don't know. It's your crystal ball, my crystal ball. Who do we want to predict? So.
Everything I read on the engineering side of the house is that because there's still not enough engineers graduating and our construction labor force is not expanding, that capital costs are not going to, if they may flatten, but they're not going to be, even if recession occurs, there's still not enough contractors out there doing the work, and there's a lot of federal money. So, but
So-
again, my crystal ball versus your crystal
Yeah,
ball.
yeah,
so.
and I mean,
just
the
sharing.
question is the 30% and 20% increase, 30% increase over the last year or two, is that primarily labor-driven, material-driven? And I think it's both. Material-driven is supply issue and supply limitations. COVID had its effect, I've seen this in electronics. We're finally seeing it come back to normal. And actually, if you look at electronics, not that it's one-to-one, but electronics is actually slight deflationary right now. And that could happen here too because of the artificial nature of the inflationary effects on capital. So I just want to be careful because if we increase the rates, I don't believe we'll ever come back and decrease the rates. And what we're trying to do is do a big change here based on several factors that caught up to us, and I don't want to overshoot. So I would probably err more on the 75% than the 100%. But that's, I could be argued both ways depending on where we think the world's going to be in 2 and 5 years.
And it's one of those things that you're going to land somewhere, and I generally am inclined to go to the 100 because I do believe that adjusting rates down is something that we could do. In fact, I think 218 envisions that sort of thing where when you do a rate study, if you've got excessive reserves and other things, then it's expected that your rates are going to drop. And I think one of the lessons that I'm learning here is that we need to kind of connect and correlate water district rate studies that we're doing with sanitation district rate studies, so that if we're doing one, we should probably be doing the other. That we waited too long on this, and that is something that we won't happen again. And furthermore, it's not a big surprise that all this stuff is old. So it seems to me that the rate studies done previously were probably talking about the age of the infrastructure, and therefore you would think the rates would be set in a way that would allow for the replacement of the aging system. So, it's hindsight is 20/20, as they say. So there's that. Can you put the map up? Can you put up the slide that has the map of the? I'm surprised to hear that the Encinitas Ranch is in the ESD, so I can't see where Saxony is there
Yeah.
and where Quail Gardens Drive is.
Here's
Quail
Quail
Gardens,
Garden
right about
Drive.
there, yeah.
That's Quail Gardens Drive right there? Okay. And Leucadia Wastewater District, what are their plans for rates? Have we heard of any studies being done by Leucadia?
They just did a they just did a rate increase. And so the numbers shown here is their new rate for next year.
Okay. And the other thing that I would like to do is be able to look at the reserve policy that we have, written reserve policy. Is it something that mirrors our city reserve policies, or, so maybe there's, is it possible that we might want to have a reserve policy for these sanitation districts that's different than our city policy because of the issues related to the capital needs and the aging infrastructure?
These
It-
I'm sorry. These reserve policies are specific for CSD and ESD that was approved back in 2003. So, yeah. So, but again, I think after we finish the rate study this time around, we need to go back and revisit, because if you look at the numbers that were in 2003 recommended, like $1 million for operation, maybe something that we need to reevaluate and figure out what if there is other numbers that will most fit the 2020s.
And one last quick question. We have some sophisticated pipe inspection systems that we use for our stormwater system. Do we use that same technology for our wastewater systems?
Yes, we are actually in the process of televising all our pipelines in order to provide that information for the condition assessment. We have already identified 73 sections of pipe during that CCTV during the last 3 months that we need to line, replace, or do points repairs on.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, we've been talking about 100%, 75%, no crystal ball, right? Why not something in between? Is that just out of that could be, right? 80, 85, okay. And then the other is, we hadn't done a rate study since 2015. When would we do the next one? When should we do the next one?
In 5 years. We should, if we approve a rate study for 5 years to come, then we will have to do it the last year of the 5 years in order for us to do the next one.
We fell behind this time, but we should keep on track next time.
That's
And then
correct.
can you go to the chart that has the red and the green, the comparator to the other areas? No, I'm sorry, not that one. It's the light green and
Yep.
dark red.
This
Yeah,
one?
There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
So with Lucadia wastewater district now with their new rate shown, if we're at 100%, we're quite a bit above that. If we're at 75%, we're trying to keep in pace with them, right? Okay. And if we're at 80, 85%, we're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
It's a new color. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hinsey.
Thank you. Yeah, I just will give another reason why I'm supportive of the 100% CIP is because for the exact reason that you described, Isam, that we've had it at San Elijo JPA too. We had this great recycled water project. We want to be really forward-thinking and very ambitious, and we ended up having to break it into 3 separate parts and just start with the first one because the bids came back so much higher. And I don't even know that, I think we only received 1 bid for that one as well. So I think if we put ourselves at 75%, we're risking doing even less than that. And we don't want to be in the position here where we're only able to maintain at the bare minimum. We really want to move forward with more ambitious projects and support our agencies to get there. So I think it's critical that we do 100%, knowing that we might do fewer projects, but that they're all going to cost more.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, just a question of clarification. You said the Lucadia rate is the new rate for next year, but we're talking about new rates every year for 6 years. Where will they be after 6 years? Do you know their rate increase for next year, the year after, but et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What are they looking at?
I could dig it out. I
Yeah,
don't have
okay.
it off my head.
Yeah,
I
'cause
don't think that
I feel
they
like
did-
we're comparing apples and oranges right now, and I'd like to get apples to apples.
Yeah. I don't think they did a 5-year. I think they did a 3-year, if I'm not mistaken.
Carlsbad ended up adopting only a 3-year. I
3-year.
don't remember on Lucadia.
Yeah, I think Lucadia also did 3 years instead of 5.
Yeah. Probably because of the murky nature of the crystal ball.
Yeah. And Carlsbad had increases of 20% for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I would believe it. Yeah.
Next 3 years.
Well, who gets to set the number of years that we do the study for? It's our prerogative, so if we want to go 3 and bring out the crystal ball again for the next 3, we can do that?
idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, but when you plan for a longer range, it's easier to spread the monies around rather than to be stuck to 3 years and then come back. CIP projects have been increased, and then instead of doing 19%, you're all of a sudden doing 25%. So the longer duration. But again, there's the crystal ball issue here that we have to deal with because we don't really know what's going to be in the next couple of years.
Well, and it might give us an opportunity to go 100 for 3 years, and then, where are we at? And then maybe go down to 75 for the last 2 or whatever, so.
And that could be done. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Councilmember Hensy, did you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that that's a really good idea. I think we should do it within 3 years, because, I've been on this council for 5 years. This is the first time I've done it, and it's really important, I think, to be aware of these issues. So I think 3 years at 100% is a really good way to not have to read the crystal ball and be wrong.
Yeah, that five-year crystal ball burns a lot of energy, takes a lot of electricity to fire up. You want to, I think she might have your answer, but you go ahead and
Yeah,
ask
no.
more
Well,
questions.
and I was
Yeah.
going to say, coupled with that, we also have to set a target percent increase, rate increase over that. We would be 100% funding the CIP, but you also, or would we do 19 or 20 or 15% for those 3 years if we started there as a policy or as a recommendation?
Well, if we want to do 3 years, we'd have to go back and do the calculations again so that our reserve policy is met with the funding that we have. So there will be some additional calculations that might need to be done.
Well, I'm sure there,
One of the I'm sorry.
go ahead. Bruce, did you have a follow-up?
No, I'm done.
I think there's pros and cons to 3s and 5s, and we're still at a stage where we can look at these options, right?
Yes.
Our next meeting in the new year will include 75 and 100, and you maybe look at something in between, and 3 and 5. I don't want to make it too much more difficult, but if you can punch some numbers in and show us what the benefits or drawbacks to one or the other would be, that would be great.
We could come back with additional options that we have. One of the challenges that we have in regards to the 3-year, I just want to share with the council, is that at this point in time, we're doing condition assessment. So what's happening is once the condition assessment results are out, then we will have a couple of years for us to do design, and the construction will start on most probably in year 4 and 5. So there's something that need to take into consideration. If we limit the amount of monies that we are saving for our future CIP program, might be another hurdle that we have to go through in 3 years, just because of the way that we are at, or the stage that we are at with our condition assessment. Because condition assessment results, and then you do design, and then you do the construction, which is the majority of the CIP expenditure.
So for Leucadia, the fiscal year 2025, which is next year's rates, which is what matches your rating, when your rate is a 4308. Then for fiscal year 26, it jumps to 4825, and then to 5307, and then they're having it flat in 2728, to staying at 5307.
My understanding from Paul that they're going to revisit this in 2027. And
Oh,
that's
they're
why
doing a
they
3-year
kept it
study
as-
too,
yeah,
essentially,
Yeah, they do
so-
the 3-year study. Yeah, but Carlsbad and Leucadia, they do have a replacement program in place already, so they have a better understanding of what their needs would be in 3 years there, rather than what we have currently in Encinitas.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. I see no other questions, requests to speak, so I think that means we're done, unless you have anything more to add.
No, it just, so what I got out of there is, do you want an option of doing it 100%, 75? And heard some discussion that somewhere in between, is that another option? I mean, there are so many options, and then
Yeah.
3 and 5 year, or, so if we can get a better direction of exactly what you would like to see in the next time around, so that we will limit our options and limit the different scenarios that we be presenting.
I'd love a spreadsheet that allowed you to kind of plug a number in and see what happens to the bars and things like that. Maybe
We
that's,
can do that too. It's that's another option.
Councilmember Ayers.
Yeah, I just did a quick calculation of Leucadia numbers, and that was a 12% increase the first year and a 10% the second. So how are they immune to the forces of finance that the rest of the world appears to be suffering from? Are they brilliant investors or something? They have a huge cash reserve, or is it that they have a whole bunch of connection charges that they've been collecting out of the Carlsbad area, developing in the last 10 to 15 years? Maybe that's it.
I don't have that.
I don't have that information. I don't remember from
That
the
would be
report,
something I would be
yeah.
interested in next time, is
Okay.
that, you know,
It's probably a little bit of everything. I do know that their assumptions for inflation are less than mine. I just, in my conversations with the treatment plant manager, general managers, Scott and Mike, Mr. Thornton and Mr. McClellan, I didn't feel as comfortable going as low as they were. But
okay.
then
But
you can direct me otherwise, and I'm just was,
Well, and I'm just looking at their map going, their map extends all up in, La Costa area that has quite a bit of brand-new or 10-year-old infrastructure, so they probably got huge, and their connection charges may have been more up-to-date than ours, so.
and they're a bigger district, that there is some economy of scale. They're a much larger area.
Okay.
It's not completely a factor, but it is a small factor.
Yeah. What percentage of Encina are they, do you know, offhand? Or 4%?
I
If ESD is 4%?
I think they are 16 or 17%.
So 4 times our ESD size. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, this special meeting is adjourned.
One last request. Can we get a copy of the presentation tonight and to us?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'd like to
I'm-
request the clerk post it to the website. Thank you.
I mean, they want to see options.
I could have another meeting and I show, the different percentages, and make it more toggly. You really want to go there though?
So it's 3 and 5. They want to compare 3 and 5, right?
3 and 5, that doesn't change anything. It's more of a, they wanted to.
No, 3 and 5 will change because that will reduce the amount of capital for,
Oh,
right?
correct.
So, so it will change it, but the only thing is we're gonna get stuck in
Then
after
I
3
still have
years.
to, yeah, I still have to project those future years. And projecting those future years doesn't help us. Because when I project those future years, that's what I mean, we're drawing it, we're so upside down at the moment. That this is just getting, the 3 years is just getting us to equal.
Yeah, but 3 years doesn't get you off the negative.
Exactly.
So that means that there are gonna be additional percentages and I asked the last question, but they didn't get that answer.
Maybe it's city manager differently. Maybe she.
No?
Teresa. I was listening so long.
Yes,